Hey guys, we're back with another episode of the Gedunk podcast. It has been, I would say a week, but it's only Tuesday as we're recording this. But it's been a weekend for sure. Bobby, how you doing today, man?
Uh, I'm doing okay considering. I mean, the developments that have happened here in the past, 72 to 96 hours are disturbing to say the least. I understand why they're happening. We're going to get into that, but make no mistake, America, the constitutional crisis is officially here,
Yep.
and they're doing it because they need to distract, which is the most insane statement I think I've ever made when it comes to national defense and security.
Yeah. So it might be helpful. I mean, I'm sure if you're listening to us, you're also listening to the news and having awareness of what's going on in Los Angeles right now. But for those who maybe lost power over the weekend or something like this, it's been a heck of a weekend. So on Friday, the America's attention is sort of focused on Elon Musk and Donald Trump having this falling out. They're arguing, they're rage tweeting back and forth at one another, kind of highlights crests when Elon Musk tells Donald Trump or tweets out that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files, and that's the real reason the entire files have not been released. Whoa, right? So everyone's sort of like, seat of our pants. We need to delve into this. The richest man in the world just called the sitting president of the United States a pedophile, essentially. And then Saturday happens, and Donald Trump, there's some immigration roundups in Los Angeles, some in downtown LA, some outside of LA, about 15 minutes outside. They're met with protesters. Word sort of starts to spread, and you start to see some images of ICE agents, probably LAPD, California police officers as well, and ICE in particular using flashbangs, which are it's a type of grenade, but it's not meant to be a destructive grenade. It doesn't carry fragmentation, in it. It's a plastic grenade. It makes a really loud noise. Back in the day, we used to, in theory, throw them into a room before you made entry when you're doing CQB and clearing a house or something like that. And Donald Trump decides to federalize the National Guard. And so he does it under Title 10 authority, which is not, there's sort of two ways in which the president can federalize the National Guard. One is to declare the Insurrection Act, right? And that gives vast, broad powers in order to send American troops into U.S. cities and U.S. towns to put down an insurrection. And under the authorities he's given them now, he's relatively proscribed, but is able to he sends in about 2,000 National Guard troops from California. And Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, tweets out that we're going to also be mobilizing Marines from Camp Pendleton. So this is on Saturday. So on Sunday, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, says, hey, we don't want federalized National Guard troops here. We don't need them. The state of California has ample law enforcement, ample capacity to keep things under control. And also, you're overreacting. I mean, these are small numbers of sort of protests. Yes, there was some property damage. There hasn't been any reports fortunately, thus far, of casualties and anything like that. And Trump and Hegseth send in a battalion of Marines from 29 Palms, which is about 3 hours or so outside of LA. And so that's where we are as of right now. The Marines supposedly under the authority are only allowed to sort of protect federal property. So, think guarding the federal courthouse or something like that, and to protect federal agents, which is where I think things could get very tricky and very dangerous, both for individuals on the ground and folks, and for the democracy. So we wanted to talk to you guys about all of this, but I want to bring one point off right off the get-go, which is that this is a battle for attention.
Bingo.
This is a battle of optics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most important thing over the next 24, 48, 72 hours is we have an authoritarian regime.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that at this point. They are sending in the military to put down these protests, and there's a great deal of disagreement. I'm not in Los Angeles, but if you are, please weigh in the comments. But this is a battle of attention, and what we're fighting over is the public opinion in the United States of America. Now, one would think there is limited appetite in America for federal overreach and shooting protesters in the street and violence and things of that nature. And I wish that were necessarily true, but I think it's instructive to bring up a little bit of what happened after Kent State in 1970.
History matters.
History matters. So in 1970, in Kent State, there's a student protest against the Vietnam War. The National Guard is called out, the Ohio National Guard. There is a back and forth between the protesters and some poorly led National Guardsmen, led by all accounts, a weak officer. He commanded his troops to fire on the protesters, and they did so, killing 3 people. Now, many of you are familiar with that incident. And what's instructive about that, I think, in some ways, is of course a loss of life is terrible. And that's not my point. But my point is that after the Kent State shooting, public opinion in the United States overwhelmingly was in favor of the National Guardsmen and not in favor of the protesters. This dynamic, in fact, it's been polled, and it took a good 20 years for American public opinion to be, originally there was about 60% of Americans blamed the protesters and said that the National Guard acted appropriately. And those numbers have switched, but over decades. So the optics matter. The waving of the Mexican flags matters. The cars on fire matter. Consider the difference in optics between a masked protester in black, waving a Mexican flag in front of a car on fire. Consider that between some people showing their face, walking up to the soldiers and offering them a Frappuccino from Starbucks and saying, "Hey, we agree with you guys, right?" Now, one of those things is going to be on Fox News, and it's going to be the front page of the New York Post and the Washington, Times and conservative-leaning organizations, and it's going to drum up support for the use of force against American citizens and protesters. And the other is going to take the wind out of their sails.
Completely.
And that is what I mean when I say that this is a battle of optics.
Right.
We have now set the table for, the protesters on the streets of Los Angeles are not going to be able to establish a no-go zone for federal. I mean, they're going to lose. And I think they're mistaken if they think that provoking armed masked agents of the state to use violence is an effective political strategy, because the evidence shows that it's not. So that was a lot. I'm going to shut up for a second and let Bobby talk.
No, trust me, I get it. I think you're absolutely right. This is a battle of optics, because the Trump administration needs to change the recent optics. Okay. Up until this point, they have been marred by incompetency, scandals, and the most recent, the bromance breakup between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. But this thing ramped up. It ramped up after Elon Musk said that Donald Trump's name is all over the Epstein files. Look at the timeline, people. That started. All of a sudden, you hear reports of Stephen Miller saying we need to do more. And Trump wanted to have 3,000 deportations a day. And they went from going after the criminals, as they said, to now stalking Home Depot, to now going into graduations of basically young Latino group communities, junior high graduations, elementary, to raid and grab and rip apart families in real time. Because the thing about this is they need a new scapegoat, and cruelty is part of creating that optic of power. You've been looked at weak. You've been looked at as weak. The world has said you're an idiot when it came to tariffs and all this. They've laughed at you. Domestically, people are questioning the people that you handpicked to be cabinet leaders. They look at Linda McMahon and be like, she doesn't even know what AI is. They look at Pete Hegseth. He doesn't even understand what the term operational security means. They look at Pam Bondi just making stuff up when she briefs. I mean, just hit after hit after hit. So what do? You do what authoritarians have always done. Find a minority group, exploit and expose them, and terrorize them. That's what you do. And so now we're going into the fact of not just using the National Guard, but the activation of active duty Marines. Now, let me just say this. There's this big thing behind me. I did that type of job, right? Maritime Expeditionary Security Squadron. Land, sea, and air, we're able to secure areas, right? Okay, I was the commanding officer of that. We went all over the world doing it. But there's another piece of this that people are not talking about. There is a difference between securing buildings, like they're saying the mission is, Task Force 51 in Northcom is saying that's the mission, and maintaining peace, aka being a peacekeeper. The United States of America does not exclusively train for peacekeeping as a whole. America has 30 at one time, 30 peacekeepers around the world out of a peacekeeping force the United Nations provides up to 60,000. How do I know this? Because I was one of the 30. See this blue beret? You have to be a peacekeeper in the United Nations to do it. I had to go through a completely different set of training to do this. What's happening in LA is basically a peacekeeping mission, right? But they want it to be a combative oppression mission that violates First Amendment. Don't get me wrong. There are riots there, but it's a much more limited space than is being portrayed. You see, if you look closely at the videos and you know anything about LA's geographics, it's the same areas being shown over and over again where the confrontations happening around federal buildings. But the way the media, if you go to Fox Media in particular and others, they make it seem like LA's on fire, like it's the Rodney King riots of 94. Not even remotely close. Not even remotely close. And so the law enforcement officer resources are there. They are available and they were ready. But Trump did not give Newsom and Bass a choice, because he needed to seize upon the crisis and create a new narrative. The last thing I'll say, the 700 Marines that have been brought into Task Force 51, they were not part of Task Force 51 until these orders popped up. They were slid over. Why does that matter? If you know anything about military and how we go and do deployments, you have to certify in mission sets, various mission sets. It can take up to a year before deployment to do, right? So here we're going to tell a bunch of Marines, and no matter what you do in the Marine Corps, whether you're an aviator, whether you are everyone's a rifleman first. You go and become a rifleman first, period. Which is why in the statement that Task Force 51 let out, they talked about the rules of engagement, how they're going to implement it. Why would they talk about rules of engagement if the role is supposed to be support only for those Marines? They're doing it to provide top cover, because if something goes sideways, they need to be able to say, well, here are the rules of engagement. The Marines don't know them. They don't know them because they haven't trained on them, right? And so now think about this, Dan. We're talking about rough or rules of use of force of Marines deploying in America to point their muzzles possibly at other American citizens. I want people to just pause and think about what I'm saying here. I never thought in my entire life I'd ever say statements like that. That's where we are.
Bobby, that's exactly right. And Marines are warfighters, and they're proud of that. and they should be proud of that. And I worked extensively with the Marine Corps when I was in. Worked with Marines in training operations. I worked with them in combat operations. I'm a graduate of Marine Corps Sniper School at Camp Pendleton. These guys are, if you need to go land on Okinawa or Iwo Jima, I mean, the Frozen Chosen, or go into Fallujah, or go into Sangin, and these are the right guys for it. But to Bobby's point, they're not trained for this. And when you're 22 years old, and 22 years old is not the age of the shooter, not the age of the rifleman. I mean, like the age of the squad leader. We've talked, when we were back in the day, they used to talk about the strategic corporal and the 3-block war, and you're going from peace to stability operations to combat operations. And the idea of the strategic corporal is those decisions that 22-year-old is making, who's maybe done one prior deployment, are in effect strategic decisions, because ultimately it's going to come down to, and I think it's worth saying, I do believe that Donald Trump wants protesters to get shot.
I do too.
I think that is part of his calculus. He said it before. He said it to Mark Esper in his first term. He wanted people to get shot in the legs. I believe that Donald Trump wants dead Americans.
He thinks this is a like a 1980 Steven Seagal movie.
100%.
That's what he thinks.
We're in a real crisis here. There's federalism issues with Gavin Newsom, and now Tom Homan saying he's going to arrest Gavin Newsom, and Trump saying go ahead and arrest him, and I mean there's all sorts of stuff here that could very easily end up in front of the Supreme Court, which is the place for it. But I want people to realize that, like when we had Trygve Olsen on the show a month or two ago, we talked about the rules for dealing with autocrats. Rule number 3, Trygve's rule number 3 is don't hand them battering rams with which to beat you, right? Like, don't make it easy for them. If people on the left start rioting in the streets, that makes it easy for them. His approval rating is going to go up. This is a political fight, and he's manipulating, manipulating right now, and that's what
I think. I think you're absolutely right. There's a piece of this too that you're taught to de-escalate when you're dealing with situations like this, right? The training that I received, prior to going to Liberia after the Civil War as a peacekeeper, there's a whole piece on de-escalation. And in the little statement that Northcom put out, they're like, yeah, they've been training de-escalation. How? Did they look at a PowerPoint slide? I mean, this is something that takes nuance. And here's the difference between being in America and dealing with these issues and being overseas. When you talk about de-escalating, when you're talking about conflict, you have usually a cultural divide that provides like this buffer in processing in your thinking, right? And those who've been on the ground in situations overseas, they understand that. But when you're in your home country and you have protesters that will be able to say things that are uniquely American to try to trigger you, to try to generate a response, it makes it much more of an intimate decision of, okay, do I back down, or they're going to talk and say this about me? There are so many nuanced things about having a military force that is trained to destroy property and, if need be, kill people on behalf of the United States than a law enforcement officer or even guardsmen who have extensive training in de-escalation extensive training and removing themselves from a situation that they know 2 or 3 steps down the road could lead to using ordnance on people. They're the decision making matrix that a Marine that is training to deploy, a sailor even that's training to deploy, Army that's training to deploy, and then people who are supposed to maintain peace at home is different in many ways. And I don't like, for example, the kill triangle, the use of force, the kill triangle, all these things that you are taught from your first days in the service is designed for overseas stuff. Your use of force continuum and kill triangle, those things should not even be in your mindset for the most part if you're being a peacekeeper here in the United States, a law enforcement officer here in the United States. So you're telling me in less than a day, 2-3 days, however long it takes for them to get ready to deploy, that they're going to be able to be deprogrammed, reprogrammed, understand new rules of use of force, the actual rules of, quote, engagement. The fact I'm saying rules of engagement in Los Angeles, California is blowing my mind. They're supposed to understand that. And like you said, that 20-something-year-old squad leader that's supposed to implement those orders based on the ramblings and rants of Stephen Miller and Donald Trump makes no sense to me. Why should they even be put in that situation?
Yeah, no, I think that's right, man. And they're different skill sets. Law enforcement and combat are different skill sets, right?
Exactly.
The Insurrection Act is for a civil war.
Yes.
And so again, back to the optics of this, back to the attention. What are people going to pay attention to? MAGA's good at using optics, right? I mean,
Right.
they are. They're good at it. Donald Trump coming off the stage with his fist and the blood coming down his hair. It's a great picture, man. I mean, it goes right into their narrative, and they're going to use these images of burning cars, and it doesn't matter one burning car. You can get it from 20 different angles and just, wait till it smokes up a little bit more, and you've got the nightly news right there, right? So, this is a really, really tricky time. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we saw coming and kind of lessons learned. So, about a year ago, it was in February of 2024, it was starting to look like Donald Trump might win. And I was part of a group exercise that a think tank kind of put on, and I flew out to California, and we had a UCLA professor kind of design a scenario for us. And there were a bunch of people playing different roles. We had a MAGA side, we had a small D Democrat side, and the scenario that was given to us to play was a Donald Trump was the president. It's the first, month or two of his presidency. There's an incident on the border. I think it was in the scenario, it was Eagles Pass, Texas. A migrant family is killed. It's caught on video, and the video goes viral. And the video goes viral, and Trump, becomes enraged and gets very sort of starts threatening to send in the National Guard and invoke the Insurrection Act. And the governor, there's a governor of Texas who's
the family that's killed is American, or are they migrant?
They're migrants.
Okay, migrant. Okay, make sure.
So they come in, they get killed, and all these militias start coming to the border. Right. So you get like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers and all these ass clowns. And they come down to the border and they start doing their patrols of the border, their own patrols. They say we're a sovereign nation. Trump, implicitly and explicitly encourages these groups. The governor of New Mexico, which is a blue state, says, hey, we don't need federal support. And here, that's the scenario, and go. And what we did when we game planned this, and we had ex-Army generals there, we had ex-undersecretaries of departments of defense, we had political types, we had some folks who were sort of experts in, political messaging. And we found a few things. One thing we found was that we couldn't, on the small D Democrat side, and I was a militia leader exercise. And so, for the small D Democrats, they couldn't keep pace with us. It was so much easier to cause chaos
Then to
than
prevent
it
and stop it.
was. It was so easy. All you had to do was say, "Hey, we're gonna, in the scenario, we're gonna start patrolling over here, and we're gonna start, rounding up migrants and throwing them in the back of pickup trucks tied with zip ties." And the federal government couldn't do anything about that. They couldn't, or sorry, the small D Democrats couldn't do anything about that.
Right.
We talked about the messaging and how, the political side was just saying, hey, we just flashed up on the nightly news, a cop got killed or whatever. And, or a soldier got injured defending the border. Right. And it's very, very quickly getting out of control. Very, very quickly can get out of control. And so one lesson that we took away is because you can't keep up with the chaos, you have to have the positions in place ahead of time.
Right.
And what that means is you have to be able to disincentivize violent behavior on the behalf of the Trump administration. And the only thing that's worked to disincentivize that behavior thus far is economic pain. And what that could look like is something like a strike, something like a general strike, boycotts of certain companies, things like that, which already has sort of worked, right? I mean, people are boycotting Tesla, and all of a sudden Elon's calling Trump a pedophile, right? So, there are cards that can be intelligently played. But, flipping over the cards and making barricades is not, it's counterproductive and dangerous.
Right. So you're hammering on the optics, which lead to the messaging. What is the message behind everything that we're seeing? Right. Trump feels weak. He feels weak. He's been getting his butt handed to him by the Supreme Court. He's having it handed to him in real time by the legislature, because even though the House bill passed by one vote, the big, beautiful bill, it's DOA in the Senate. He knows it. And that's why all the changes are having to happen and this, that, and the other, which means the Republicans may have to go against their word and take out of Medicaid, which they said they weren't going to do. He knows the political fallout from that could be significant. So he's taking a loss in the legislature. He's taking loss after loss in the judiciary branch. So he's controlling the only thing he can control, right? And in order for him to still appear strong, he's doing what he can domestically to do that. Why? Because internationally, he's getting his ass handed to him too. I read a story of our favorite guy, Pete Hegseth, who was not allowed to go to the Middle East by himself again because of what he has done recently over in Asia, this, that, and the other. They don't trust him to be the messenger abroad by himself. So they stick him on the plane. They stuck him on Air Force One with Trump. They allowed Pam Bondi. They've allowed a lot of people to go abroad, but not him. And that's supposed to be his most powerful arm. So make no mistake, internationally, he's a laughingstock when you look at the tariffs. I'm looking at an article right now saying that, the World Bank sees the U.S. growth rate of the economy being halved, here this year. That's unbelievable. It's unprecedented in the last 20, 30 years. So he needs a win. He can't do it on the international stage, so he's doing what he can domestically. The problem of what he's trying to do, though, is when you look at polling that came out, I want to say yesterday, Polling USA, most Americans believe that what's happening in L.A., almost 60%, hey, the governor and the mayor, the governor of California and the mayor should be the ones that take lead, not the federal government. You got about 19% that don't know. But at the same time, even Americans understand that, hey, riots happen all the time. But why the hell we're sending active duty force Marines there, National Guard there when they weren't requested? That's it's not unprecedented, but it's so damn rare. It's only happened basically when Rodney King, those riots, which were different. And then, like I said, Selma, Alabama, and the civil rights movement and the defiance of Supreme Court orders and court orders to desegregate. Completely different ball of wax. What we're seeing in real time is the de-evolution of Trump's domestic policy, the impotency of his foreign policy, And the one thing that he cares about most, his economic policy going by the wayside. And so what do? You pick the most vulnerable people in your society, remind people that they are evil all of a sudden. They're monsters. I watch videos of Latinos in LA helping the police who have tear gassed themselves in their restaurants, trying to get that stuff out of their eye, even though they're the ones at risk. Now, that has divided the Latino community very much so here. But at their core, they're trying to be and do the right thing. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Hegseth is still, he posts, and I got to just say this, he posts on Twitter and social media, basically trying to be the big bad boogeyman as the Secretary of Defense. I've never seen that. Rumsfeld didn't even do that when we first joined up. You know what I'm saying? This imagery that he has to be the tough guy too, Mr. DUI himself, is just unbelievable to me.
Well, I think, that's the authoritarian, right? I mean, Trump said this, right? He was like, the country's broken, the country's a flaming shithole or whatever, and I'm the only one who can fix it. And that's what he's trying to show. He's trying to show that he's a strong man and he can fix things, even if there's nothing really to be fixed, right? I mean, I think it's okay to rationally say our immigration system has real problems and we need to have a comprehensive overhaul. I think many Americans, if not the majority, would agree with that statement. But sending in 2-7, the Marine Battalion, into LA because, a couple people wore some gas masks and flew a Mexican flag. I mean, it's real quick. And this was the plan all along, Bobby, right? Like the first thing Hegseth did was fire the JAGs.
Yep.
Right?
I'm glad you brought it up. It was on my list, Dan. It was on my list to go there.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, right, the military is governed by a different set of laws. So there's the Uniform Code of Military Justice, right, which is sort of the law when you're in the military. And much of it is similar, right? Like you can't shoplift, you can't murder, you can't rape, all that stuff. But there are peculiarities of the UCMJ that go into how one conducts oneself overseas in a combat zone. The UCMJ covers things like, adultery, which, it's kind of hilarious that Pete Hegseth is in charge of enforcing that now. But the first thing that Hegseth did as when he got into DOD was to fire the JAGs. And so what is a JAG? A JAG is a Judge Advocate General. It's basically military lawyers and military judges. There's their own sort of judicial system. And they're the people who ultimately, even on deployment, we had a JAG. In fact,
I had one.
Ron DeSantis was famously a JAG attached to a SEAL team. I forget, maybe SEAL Team 1 or something like that. And so the JAG would, you'd get in the country and the JAG would give you a brief on kind of the rules of engagement. They might say, hey, for us, it was you have to hostile intent or hostile action, right? Or positively ID someone. I remember my first brief when we got to Iraq, the Mahdi militia was, if you were wearing like a Mahdi militia uniform, you were considered an enemy combatant. But, they touch on all that stuff, right? And because there are laws in warfare.
Yes.
There's the law of conflict.
Yes.
There's the conventions, all these things. And Hegseth shit-canned all these guys, right? So he got rid of people who are military lawyers. Think of if you're totally unfamiliar, think of oh God, what blanket? What's the Tom Cruise movie?
A Few Good Men.
Few Good Men.
Tom
right?
Cruise and Demi Moore.
Yeah. So he fired large numbers of those people and people who would not simply sort of sign off on whatever it is that Trump administers. And when he was asked about it, he very directly said, well, we don't want them around here in case we want to do something that they say is illegal.
Right.
And so this has been the plan all along, guys.
Yep. You decapitate the legal, moral, and ethical reasoning of a force. So they are more primed to do your bidding. You replace that. You are now the moral authority. You are now the legal authority. And here's the thing. In World War II, the Nazis that did what they did were still held accountable. Hitler was not there to protect them. The world and just to give you a tiny bit of history, after the Great War, aka World War I, the world got together and came up with Geneva Conventions. They came up with the lawful ways to which you will fight and conduct warfare. And it's been modified over the years, but all the nations of the world have signed off on this. Now, at the backbone of that is this ethical and moral dilemma and balance that has to take place. The fact that we had our JAGs removed, I immediately was like, oh my gosh, that's the red flag for us and our military doing things internationally. Right.
Yep.
But I did not really take into account what happens if they deploy active duty military within the borders of the United States. And so now we're talking about how they do business, not just rules of engagement, rules of the use of force, but now we're talking about, are they going to violate a Geneva Convention because they're going to be dealing with a civilian population? These aren't combatants, Dan. American citizens are not combatants. How do they make that balance happen?
I think we're at a scary stage where the brakes have come off, the guardrails have come off, and we quite literally are on the verge of a decision being made by somebody in their, early to mid 20s, and these are, when you get in these types of situations, I promise you that no matter how much we talk about these things and how much learning there is, a lot of times it's literally monkey see, monkey do. And leadership matters, and individual leadership matters. And I have seen firsthand Marine non-commissioned officers get their men, in check, in combat, a guy who wanted to do something that he shouldn't have done, and his gunnery sergeant, ripped him a new asshole in front of his whole platoon, and that was the end of that. And we're now in a situation where this is what we're asking these kids to do, these young adults. We're asking them, and that gunnery sergeant was probably 34. He was like a grandfather to these guys.
Yep.
Ultimately, in the course of his life, was a young man, and I'm both worried for my country and worried for this democracy, but I also take heart in knowing that there are trained NCOs, there are trained officers who I believe and I expect to do their duty and to follow only legal orders, and to disobey legal orders. And
well, hold on, Dan. Hold on. Can I say this? And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to make sure I hammer this for everybody listening. I 100% agree with you. I've talked about the difference in the oaths and this, that, and the other. However, my point is, I'm pissed the hell off that they even have to make those decisions. Their leadership has put them in situations that they should not be in, Dan. They shouldn't be having to make those decisions, not within the United States border. I mean, what are we talking about?
And their civilian leadership, to be clear, their civilian leadership, not
right.
their battalion, right?
Right. I mean, the civilian leader, Hegseth, Mr. I was a combat veteran. You know better. You fucking know better than to do this.
Well, again, it gets back to what is the point? I think, is it insane to think that Donald Trump wants a Tiananmen Square? I don't know that it is anymore. And I just like many of you listening, I roll my eyes when I see some of the hyperbole that historically has come out of the left. I consider myself left of center, but I also think that some of the rhetoric that we occasionally see from the hashtag resistance is perhaps counterproductive and at times goes too far. But I don't think we're there anymore. I think we're in a place where it's realistic to think that the National Command Authority wants a confrontation in the streets of America between United States Marines and American citizens. And that's an incredibly scary place to be.
And I not only agree with you, I think in their mind, it shows that they are the authority. Because at the end of the day, this is not about balance of power. This is about Trump having ultimate authority. And I believe that his handlers, and I'm going to start using that term as this man slides down the mental slope, right? His handlers understand that a concentration of power makes whatever agenda they come up with much easier. And part of that agenda, a significant portion of the agenda, the part that is the aphrodisiac to their followers, is the revenge portion. They're not trying to govern. They're trying to protect who they want and go after who they hate. That is the administration. That's the administration. When you look at every other metric outside of those two things, they're an absolute failure, abject failure. Economy going down the tank, right? Domestic governance going down the tank. International relations going down the tank. But I can tell you what they are doing. They're protecting the rich with the bill that they want. You know, the oligarchs who have access to them, they'll be protected. But here's the thing. Everybody that sneezed wrong, that said anything wrong, they are using the power of the federal government to go after. It's interesting to me how I've not heard the same party that he is a leader of, who have always been about state rights. Where the hell are they right now when it comes to California?
Or individual rights, even, right?
Yeah, where the hell are they? They have been on this with Biden. They were on it like a hobo on a ham sandwich. Where are they?
Totally. And I think that's right. And I would also add that I hope, and in my closing thoughts here, I hope that both sides kind of walk back from this line. And even if they do, this is not the end of it, right? The best case scenario is that this ends up being just a test run.
Right.
And then later this summer, it's on again in Chicago or San Francisco or whatever. Pick a blue state and imagine a Marine Corps battalion coming in there. 'Cause that's where we are. So I think that if this is it's the 5-alarm fire, man.
It is.
If we're real close to violence in American city streets, and it's terrible. I hope we walk back from it, but
I do, Dan. I do find it a coincidence that, we're talking about LA. We're looking at the majority of where these raids are taking place. They're overwhelmingly in blue cities. Now, if you think about this logically for a second, the red states, which rely heavily on agriculture and immigrant labor, it's funny how they haven't been rated at the same rate. Now, there are people who are now tracking this, and it is blatantly obvious where they're attacking, where they're targeting. Dude, we have drones that are flying over LA right now. MQ-9s flying over Los Angeles, California. I want the American people to understand we are crossing a Rubicon that is going to be hard to go back on. It's going to be damn hard. And for my MAGA citizens out there, just imagine that all these things get broken, and for some reason you lose power. Do you want the left to do the same thing? Do you?
Yeah. No, it's true, man. It's an interesting time, and well, we appreciate you guys listening.
Yep.
We will certainly keep you up to speed on our takes on this and what you can do. At a minimum, though, y'all need to be calling your congressman. Y'all need to be talking to your senator, be talking to your local governance. And if you know anyone who is being affected by these events directly, please let us know. We'd love to talk to people about their experiences in Los Angeles and what they saw on the ground, because I promise you that what you are going to be getting from Fox News and this administration is going to be selling a bill of goods, and it's not going to be what's really going on the ground.
Yep, I agree. Thanks guys for listening, man. And we'll keep the conversation going.
All right, thanks, guys.